March 2nd, 1967, Las Vegas. From the street, the sands looked like every other postcard of old Vegas. Neon buzzing, cabs jammed at the entrance, desert air humming with money and cheap perfume. Inside the Copa room, it felt smaller, more intimate. 2,000 people sat at little round tables, faces turned toward a red curtain and a single microphone that meant only one thing. Frank Sinatra was about to come out. In the 10th row, a man in a gray department store suit crushed his ticket stub in a sweaty fist. His name was Howard Briggs. To the ushers, he was just another out-of-town customer with bad posture and a cheaper suit than the room deserved. They didn't see the weight of the .38 revolver hidden under his jacket. They didn't see the way he stared at the stage like it owed him something. Howard wasn't there to hear Sinatra sing. He was there to make sure Sinatra never sang again. How a singer became the enemy. 6 months earlier, Howard's life had been small and predictable. Factory job, cramped Chicago apartment, TV dinners, a wife who graded papers at the kitchen table while the radio played in the background. Linda loved music. Lately, she'd fallen hard for one voice in particular. Frank Sinatra spun on the turntable almost every night. Studio albums, live records, anything she could find. When he sang, Linda's shoulders relaxed. The tired lines at the corners of her mouth softened. She hummed while she worked, tapping a spoon on the counter, in time with the rhythm. One August evening, Howard came home to find Sinatra on the television too. Black and white special, orchestra behind him, camera tight on his face. Linda wiped her hands on a dish towel and stood in the doorway, smiling at the screen. "Turn that down," Howard muttered, dropping his lunch pail. "You can barely hear it," she said. "I said turn it down, Linda." Instead, she walked to the set and nudged the volume up a notch. "Frank's the only man in this apartment allowed to raise his voice," she said lightly. It was meant as a joke. It landed like a verdict. Something inside Howard twisted. He heard himself snap about bills and respect, and how maybe Frank Sinatra could start paying the rent if he was so wonderful. Linda listened, eyes going colder with every sentence. When he finally ran out of steam, she said very quietly, "Frank sings about what men feel and are too scared to say. You don't sing anything, Howard. You just drain the room." 3 weeks later, she was gone. One suitcase missing from the closet. One note on the table. "I can't do this anymore. I want to feel alive while I still can," it read. And at the end, the line that lodged in Howard's brain like shrapnel. "Frank Sinatra makes me feel something. You just make me feel small." After that, Sinatra's voice followed him everywhere. On jukeboxes, on co-workers' radios, in television commercials, selling airline tickets and cigarettes. Every time, Howard heard that smooth baritone glide over words about love and loss. He pictured Linda somewhere, feeling everything he never could give her. Pain looks for someone to blame. Howard picked the man on the record cover. The gun and the ticket won. Gray October morning, he walked into a pawn shop 3 blocks from the factory. He told the man behind the counter the neighborhood was getting rough and he needed protection. The man didn't ask questions. He put a scarred .38 on the glass and named a price. When Howard wrapped his fingers around the grip, the tremor in his hands stopped. The weight felt obscene and comforting at the same time. A few days later, a co-worker dropped a newspaper advertisement on the break room table. "Look at this. Vegas trip. Sinatra at the Sands. If I had the money, I'd go in a heartbeat." The black and white photo in the ad showed Sinatra mid-song, hand lifted, eyes half closed. Underneath, in bold letters, "March thinking 1967, late show." That night, Howard called the number in the ad. He booked a room he couldn't afford, and a seat as close to the stage as the clerk could manage. When he hung up, he laid the ticket next to the revolver on the table and stared at both until they blurred together. In his head, it sounded simple. Go to Vegas, wait until Sinatra was wrapped in applause, stand up, shout something that would make him look directly into the 10th row, and raise the gun. He didn't know what would happen after that. He just knew the story, in his head, ended with silence. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Francis Albert Sinatra. Back in Vegas, the Copa Room glowed. Waiters wove through the tables, balancing trays of martinis and highballs. A low rumble of conversation filled the air until the house lights flickered twice, the universal signal that it was time. The orchestra took their places, horns flashing under the spotlights. Backstage, Sinatra adjusted his cufflinks and checked his reflection once more. 51 years old, still the king of this town. His face had more miles on it now, but the eyes were the same cold blue that made cameras lean in. 5 minutes, Frank, a stagehand called. Make it 4, Sinatra said, and smiled. In the 10th row, Howard's heart thudded against the gun. He rehearsed the plan one more time. Stand, shout, raise, end. The lights went down. The band hit the bright, brassy opening of Come Fly With Me. The MC's voice boomed over the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, the Sands Hotel proudly presents Mr. Francis Albert Sinatra. The crowd exploded. People stood, whistled, clapped like they were trying to knock the dust off the ceiling. Sinatra walked out like he had invented walking out. Midnight blue suit, narrow tie, the casual half-smile of a man who knew he was exactly where he belonged. He drifted up to the microphone and caught the first line like he was catching a coin. Come fly with me. Let's fly. Let's fly away. Even Howard felt it for a second. That strange lift in the chest when a great singer hits a phrase just right. For a moment the plan slipped, and he was simply part of the crowd, watching a man bend the room with sound. Then he remembered the empty chair at his kitchen table. He saw Linda's neat handwriting on the note. The feeling curdled into rage. Song followed song. The lady is a tramp. You make me feel so young. Between numbers, Sinatra joked with the band, teased people in the front rows, made everyone feel like they were in on something. By the time the orchestra slid into the stealthy, swinging intro of I've Got You Under My Skin, the Copa Room was drunk on him. That's when Howard stood up. He's got a gun. A nearby cocktail waitress saw the motion out of the corner of her eye. Men stood up for a lot of reasons. Bathroom, refill, standing ovation. But this man moved like he'd made a decision he couldn't take back. When his jacket fell open, she saw the dull metal at his side. For half a heartbeat, she thought, no, it can't be. Not here. Then his hand went inside his jacket. The tray slid from her fingers. Glasses shattered on the carpet. A sharp, wrong sound in the middle of the smooth arrangement. Sinatra's head turned slightly. Years on stage had trained him to hear anything that didn't belong. The waitress pointed, her voice cracking. He's got a gun! Panic detonated. Tables scraped, drinks spilled, people grabbed each other without knowing who they were pulling. The back rows rushed toward the exits. The front rows dropped behind chairs or froze completely. The brassy swing of Under My Skin collapsed into noise as the drummer lost the beat and the horns dropped their instruments. Howard drew the revolver and pointed it at the stage. At Frank Sinatra. Sinatra steps forward. Later, everyone who had been there tried to explain this part. Some said he must not have seen the gun clearly. Some said he was crazy. Others said he was simply too proud to duck. What they all agreed on was this: he did not run. On stage, a bodyguard shouted, "Frank, down!" and reached for him. Sinatra shrugged him off, eyes locked on the man in the 10th row. He took one step forward, into the spotlight. The room went dead quiet in that strange way crowds do, when all the air leaves at once. You could hear someone crying somewhere near the bar. You could hear the faint clink of a dropped fork. Howard's arms shook. The barrel wobbled, but it stayed aimed at Sinatra's chest. "You ruined my life," he shouted. You took my wife." Sinatra's voice, when it came, was calmer than his pulse. "Son," he said, "you don't even know me." Howard laughed once, a wild, broken sound. "She left because of you," he said. "Because of your songs. She said I was the opposite of Sinatra." For a fraction of a second, something flickered in Sinatra's face. Recognition, maybe. He had been hero and villain in a lot of people's stories. This wasn't new. The gun was. He took another slow step forward. "Your wife didn't leave because of a record," he said. "Nobody walks out over a melody. They walk out over the silence between the songs. That hurts, kid, but that's on us, not on vinyl." Howard's grip tightened. "If you'd never been on that TV, she'd still be home." Sinatra shook his head. "No," he said. "She just would have had a harder time putting a name to what she felt." 4 feet of air, security lingered at the edge of the stage, waiting for any distraction. One wrong tackle could squeeze the trigger they were trying to avoid. So they watched their boss do the last thing they wanted him to do. He stepped off the stage. His shoes sank into the carpet. The spotlight followed him, confused but loyal. 10 feet. 8. 6. He stopped with 4 feet of air between himself and the trembling gun barrel. From that close, Howard could see the sweat at Sinatra's hairline, the faint tick of a vein in his neck. Sinatra was not fearless. He was just moving anyway. "Look at me," Sinatra said quietly. Howard did. "You're not here because of me," Sinatra went on. "You're here because your life blew up, and you need somebody to blame, who isn't in the mirror. I get it. I've blamed a lot of people for things I did all by myself." A nervous, broken laugh came from somewhere in the crowd. "You think pulling that trigger fixes anything?" Sinatra asked. "Tomorrow they'll call you crazy on page 3 and move on. She still won't be home. You'll just have one more thing to hate yourself for." "I've got nothing without her," Howard whispered. His arms ached, his hands burned. "I don't care what happens to me." "That's not true," Sinatra said. "What happens next is the only thing that matters. You can be the guy who killed a singer, or the guy who almost did, but put the gun down. Only one of those men has a chance at being anything else in his life." The gun dipped an inch. Sinatra lowered his voice until the microphone barely caught it. "You know the difference between you and me?" he asked. Howard's jaw clenched. "Everything." "No," Sinatra said. "Just practice. I've spent a lifetime turning mistakes into something worth listening to. You made a big one tonight. You can still decide what you do with it." For a long second, nothing moved. Then Howard's shoulders sagged. His fingers opened. The gun slid from his hand and hit the carpet with a dull thud. The Copa room inhaled. Security exploded into motion, crashing into Howard, forcing him to the floor, dragging his arms behind his back. One guard kicked the revolver away. People sobbed, gasped, held each other like shipwreck survivors. Sinatra stood very still, staring at the empty space where the gun had been. "Easy on him, boys," he said finally. "He's already shot himself in the foot." The line was pure Sinatra, half joke, half truth. The laugh that rolled through the room sounded hysterical, but it was laughter all the same. The show goes on. The sensible thing would have been to end the night there. No one would have complained if the lights came up and a voice told them to return to the casino. Instead, Sinatra walked back onto the stage. The band looked like they'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. The drummer kept turning his sticks over in his hands, as if checking they were real. The trumpet player's mouthpiece shook between his fingers. Sinatra straightened his tie, adjusted the microphone stand by half an inch. Rituals he'd done 1,000 times, grounding himself. "Well," he said, voice a touch rougher than before, "that's the worst request I've ever gotten." This time, the laughter came a little easier. "If nobody else is planning to shoot me," he added, "I'd like to finish my evening's work." He turned to the pianist. "Forget under my skin. We've had enough of that. Give me That's Life, Key of D. The band slid into the opening riff. Sinatra closed his eyes for a heartbeat, then hit the first line. That's life. That's what all the people say. He'd sung it 100 times, but that night the lyrics sounded different. Less swagger, more confession. When he reached, I've been up and down and over and out, everyone in the room felt the out he'd just stared down. By the end, people were on their feet, applauding like they were grateful to be clapping for anything at all. Jailhouse Coda 2 weeks later. Howard Briggs sat in a concrete visiting room in the Clark County Jail. The public defender had explained the charges: attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon. In Vegas, pointing a gun at the town's biggest star wasn't something you walked away from. The door opened. Howard expected his lawyer. Frank Sinatra walked in instead. Without a spotlight or a tuxedo, he looked smaller, but he carried the room the same way. He pulled out a chair and sat, like this was just another meeting on a long day. Howard scrambled to his feet. Mr. Sinatra, I'm sorry. Sit down, Howard, Sinatra said. You're making me feel short. They sat. They say I'm crazy, Howard blurted. Sinatra shrugged. That's what people say when they're too lazy to ask why you did something, he said. You scared a lot of good folks. You're going to pay for that. But crazy isn't the whole story. I don't know why you're here, Howard said. I am, unfortunately, part of the story, Sinatra replied. Figured I ought to see the other lead. He leaned his elbows on the table. I told the DA you dropped the gun, Sinatra said. Told him it matters. Men who really want to kill somebody don't stop 4 feet away. That doesn't erase what you did. But it counts. You did that for me? Howard asked. For me too, Sinatra said. I don't need the headline. Singer testifies against sad sack from Chicago. I'd rather the story be about a guy who almost ruined his life and decided not to. Howard stared at his hands. I don't know how to live with what I did. You start by admitting you did it, Sinatra said. Then you don't let it be the only sentence in your biography. He stood. At night, when you're staring at cinder block, don't put me in there with you, he added. Blame the man in the mirror, then try forgiving him. That part's harder. Ask me how I know. At the door, he turned back. And Howard, he said, for whatever it's worth, you're not the opposite of Sinatra. You're just a guy who forgot he had a song. Don't forget again. The night Vegas tried to forget. Officially, the Sands called it a minor disturbance quickly handled by security. No mention of a gun, no mention of a singer stepping off the stage and walking toward it. Vegas preferred its legends glamorous, not terrifying. But 2,000 people walked out of the Copa room that night with a different story. A busboy told his cousins. A cocktail waitress told a boyfriend who didn't believe her until another waitress backed her up. Years later, a trumpet player mentioned it in a magazine interview offhand, like something he still wasn't sure he'd really seen. The details shift depending on who's telling it. Memory does that. Some swear Sinatra smiled the whole time. Others remember his hands shaking as he picked up the microphone again. A few claim they heard him humming That's Life under his breath while security wrestled Howard to the ground. But on one point, every witness agrees. When the gun came out, the crowd surged backward. Frank Sinatra stepped forward. Not because he wanted to die, not because he thought he was bulletproof, but because in that moment he believed one dangerous, stubborn thing: that a man drowning in his own failure might still grab a hand if somebody was crazy enough to hold it out. The Sands is gone now, reduced to dust and tourist trivia. The Copa room lives only in photographs and the stories of people who once sat under its low ceiling and watched a skinny kid from Hoboken bend the night to his will. Somewhere in the middle of that vanished room there was, for a few terrifying seconds, 4 feet of air between a gun and a singer. In that space, a life turned away from disaster. In that space, Frank Sinatra showed who he really was. Everyone else tried to run. He walked toward the gun,